The gunshot echoed through the mountains as the winter storm raged, carrying death on its icy breath. Katherine James stumbled forward, one hand pressed against her bleeding side, the other clutching her small leather-bound journal. Snow blanketed the Wyoming landscape in December of 1878, turning the world into a white void that threatened to swallow her whole. Her pursuers were somewhere behind her, but the howling wind had covered their tracks and hers. "Just keep moving," she whispered to herself, teeth chattering as the bitter cold seeped through her torn coat. The blood seeping between her fingers was warm, but that small comfort only reminded her of the bullet that had grazed her ribs. She'd been lucky if the outlaw's aim had been true. She'd be dead already. Katherine had never imagined her journey west would end like this. 22 years of life, and she might freeze to death in this God-forsaken wilderness, all because she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have. The stagecoach robbery had been violent and swift. When the outlaws realized she'd seen their faces, they'd pursued her into the wilderness after she'd managed to slip away during the chaos. Her foot caught on something beneath the snow, and she fell forward. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent a spike of pain through her injured side. For a moment, she lay there, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air. The temptation to close her eyes was overwhelming. "Get up," she commanded herself, but her limbs refused to obey. The cold was seeping into her bones now, a dangerous comfort that whispered sweet promises of rest. As consciousness began to fade, Katherine thought she heard the crunch of approaching hoofbeats through the snow. A hallucination, perhaps her mind's final gift before the end. The massive silhouette of a rider emerged from the swirling white. In her fading vision, he looked like a giant, wrapped in furs and leather. The last thing Katherine remembered was being lifted from the snow by strong arms, and a deep voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "She was found in the cold," the man said to his horse as he cradled her against his chest. "Hanging on by a thread, then I'll bring you back to light, miss. You ain't dying in this storm today." When Katherine awoke, it was to the crackling of a fire and the scent of coffee. For a moment, she thought perhaps she had died after all, but the sharp pain in her side when she tried to move confirmed she was very much alive. She was lying on a bed beneath several thick blankets in what appeared to be a small cabin. "Easy now," came a deep voice from across the room. "That wound needs time to heal." Katherine turned her head to see a man rising from a chair by the fire. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His dark hair was slightly too long, and a short beard covered his jaw. Despite his rugged appearance, there was something gentle in his blue eyes as he approached the bed. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. "My cabin," he replied, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup. "About 15 miles from where I found you, storms still raging outside." "Been that way for 2 days now." 2 days. Katherine tried to sit up but winced as pain lanced through her side. "Like I said, easy." He helped her drink from the cup. "Name's Lucas Porter. Most folks around these parts just call me Luke." "Katherine James," she replied after drinking deeply. "Though most call me Kate," Luke nodded. "Well, Miss James, you're lucky to be alive. Bullet just grazed you, but the cold nearly finished what the shooter started. The men who were chasing me, if there were men after you, they're long gone now, or buried under 6 feet of snow." He set the cup aside. "Want to tell me why someone was shooting at you?" Katherine hesitated. In her experience, sharing too much information with strangers rarely ended well. But this man had saved her life, and something in those blue eyes made her want to trust him. "I was on the stagecoach to Laramie when we were robbed," she explained. 3 men. They wore bandanas, but one slipped and I saw his face when he realized I'd seen him." She trailed off, the memory still fresh and terrifying. Luke's expression darkened. "You remember what he looked like?" "I'll never forget it," Katherine said quietly. "He had a scar across his left cheek shaped like a crescent moon." The change in Luke's demeanor was immediate. His shoulders tensed and his jaw tightened. "Moon Scar Ellis," he muttered. "Meanest bastard this side of the Mississippi." "You know him?" Luke's gaze drifted to the window where snow continued to fall heavily outside. Known of him for years, been tracking him and his gang for months now. He looked back at her. I'm not just a rancher, Miss James. I'm also the deputy marshal for this territory. Katherine felt a rush of relief mixed with new concern. A lawman could protect her, but his presence also confirmed how dangerous her situation truly was. Once you're healed up and the storm passes, I'll get you safely to Laramie, Luke continued. In the meantime, you're welcome to my hospitality. I'm grateful, Katherine said sincerely, though I hate to impose. Luke's lips quirked into a half-smile. Not much imposing to be done out here, it's just me and the mountains most days. He moved back to the fireplace to stir something in a pot. Hope you like venison stew. It's about all I've got until I can get to town for supplies. At this point, I'd eat boot leather if it was offered, Katherine admitted. That earned her a genuine laugh, a warm sound that seemed to fill the cabin. Well, I promise it's at least better than boot leather. As Luke prepared 2 bowls of stew, Katherine took the opportunity to study her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was small but solidly built, with a main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A door presumably led to another bedroom. The furniture was simple but well-crafted, and everything was surprisingly neat and organized for a bachelor's dwelling. How long have you lived out here? She asked as he handed her a bowl of stew. Going on 5 years now, Luke replied, settling into the chair beside the bed. Built this place myself after I took the deputy position, needed somewhere quiet away from town. Katherine carefully sat up, mindful of her injured side, and accepted the food. The first spoonful of rich, savory stew nearly brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't realized just how hungry she was. This is delicious, she said after swallowing. Don't sound so surprised, Luke replied with a wry smile. A man living alone either learns to cook or starves. As they ate, Katherine found herself studying the man who had saved her life. There was an intensity about him, a watchfulness in his eyes that spoke of experiences she could only guess at. Yet there was kindness there too, evident in the gentle way he'd tended to her wound and the care with which he ensured her comfort now. What brought you out west, Miss James? Luke asked after they'd eaten in comfortable silence for a while. Most young women aren't traveling these parts alone. Katherine set down her spoon, considering her answer. My father died last year. There wasn't much left for me in Boston after that. She ran her finger along the rim of the bowl. I was a teacher there, but the school board preferred their instructors to be either married or older spinsters. I was neither. So you decided to try your luck in Wyoming territory. I've been corresponding with the town council in Laramie. They need a school teacher and they weren't particular about my marital status. She looked up at him. I wanted a fresh start. Luke nodded, understanding in his eyes. Fresh starts are what the West is built on. And you, Katherine asked, what's your story, Deputy Porter? A shadow passed over his face. Not much to tell. Fought in the war, drifted west afterward, picked up a badge when I realized I was good with a gun and had a strong dislike for men who prey on the innocent. There was more to it than that, Katherine was certain, but she didn't press. Everyone had parts of themselves they preferred to keep hidden. She certainly did. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Luke rose and added another log to the fire. Storm's getting worse, he observed. Might be a few more days before it clears enough to travel. I hope I'm not keeping you from your duties, Katherine said. Luke shook his head. Nothing's moving in this weather, not outlaws, not stagecoaches, nothing. Besides, protecting witnesses is part of my job. He glanced at her with that half-smile again. Though most don't arrive quite so dramatically. Despite her situation, Katherine found herself smiling back. There was something reassuring about Luke Porter's steady presence, something that made her feel safer than she had in a long time. That night, Katherine slept more soundly than she expected, lulled by the crackling fire and the knowledge that, for now at least, she was protected. Outside, the winter storm continued its assault on the mountains, but within the cabin's sturdy walls she found an unexpected haven. Days passed, and Catherine's strength gradually returned. Luke proved to be a surprisingly attentive caretaker, changing her bandages with careful hands and ensuring she had everything she needed. Though the cabin was small, he managed to give her privacy while never making her feel abandoned. On the third day, when she was strong enough to sit in the chair by the fire, Luke handed her a stack of books. "Thought you might be getting bored," he said. "Not much entertainment out here, but I do have these." Katherine examined the titles with surprise. Alongside practical volumes on tracking and wilderness survival were novels by Dickens, Twain, and even a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. "You're a reader," she observed, delighted. "When there's time," Luke replied, a faint color rising in his cheeks. "Winter nights get long out here." "Thank you," Katherine said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I was beginning to fear my mind would atrophy." "Can't have that," Luke said. "Laramie needs its new schoolteacher sharp." As Katherine recovered, they fell into a routine. Luke would check her wound each morning, then prepare breakfast while she dressed. During the days, he would attend to his chores chopping wood, caring for his horse in the attached lean-to stable, and periodically clearing snow from the path to the outhouse to ensure Katherine could make the journey when needed. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading in companionable silence, sometimes talking. Katherine learned that Luke had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. He'd fought for the Union during the Civil War, an experience he spoke of rarely and with obvious pain. Afterward, unable to settle back into civilian life in the East, he'd headed west. "The open country has a way of healing a man," he told her one night as they sat watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "Out here, it's just you and the land, makes a body remember what's important." "And what's important, Deputy Porter?" Katherine asked softly. Luke considered her question for a long moment. "Honor, truth, doing right by people who can't always do right for themselves." He poked at the fire with an iron rod. Simple things, really, but easy to forget in the noise of the city. Katherine thought about her own journey west. "I think I understand that. After my father died, Boston felt suffocating, too many memories, too many expectations." "What about your mother?" Luke asked. "She died when I was 12, consumption." Katherine traced the pattern on the arm of her chair. "My father never remarried. It was just the two of us for 10 years. Must have been hard, losing him too." Katherine nodded. "He was a good man, a professor at the university. He taught me to value education, to believe that knowledge could open doors." She smiled sadly. "He would have been proud to know I became a teacher." "Sounds like he already was proud," Luke said quietly. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Katherine felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her injury. There was something so steady about Lucas Porter, something solid and true that drew her to him despite her usual caution around men. The storm continued for 5 more days, trapping them together in the small cabin. By the 6th day, Katherine was moving around freely, though her side still ached when she moved too quickly. The wound was healing cleanly, thanks to Luke's careful ministrations. That morning she awoke to sunshine streaming through the cabin's small windows. The storm had finally broken. Katherine found Luke outside, shoveling a path from the cabin door to the small barn where he kept his horse. He worked methodically, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. He'd removed his coat despite the temperature, and the sight of his broad shoulders straining against his shirt as he worked sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Beautiful day," she called, wrapping her borrowed coat one of Luke's, much too large for her frame more tightly around herself. Luke looked up, surprise giving way to a smile when he saw her. "First clear day in a week," he agreed, leaning on his shovel. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Katherine replied. "Strong enough to travel, I think." Something flickered in Luke's eyes, disappointment perhaps, before he nodded. "Good. We should get you to Laramie soon. The town council will be wondering what happened to their new schoolteacher." "If they even know I was coming on that stagecoach," Katherine said. With the robbery, they may not have received word I was arriving. All the more reason to get you there safely, Luke said. He hesitated, then added, but there's no rush. Another day or two of rest wouldn't hurt. Katherine found herself nodding, perhaps too eagerly. That might be wise, to ensure I'm fully recovered. The truth, which neither of them acknowledged aloud, was that they had grown comfortable in each other's company. The prospect of parting ways was more unsettling than either had anticipated. That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing the last of Luke's coffee, he broached a subject they'd avoided since her first day in the cabin. "We need to talk about what happens when we reach Laramie," he said, his voice grave. "Moon Scar Ellis and his gang won't have forgotten about you." Katherine's stomach tightened. For days, she'd managed to push the memory of the outlaws from her mind, focusing instead on recovery and the unexpected pleasure of Luke's company. "You think they'll come looking for me?" Luke nodded slowly. "Men like Ellis don't leave loose ends. If they know you can identify them, they'll try to silence you." "What do we do?" Katherine asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "First, we get you safely to Laramie. I have friends there, good people who can help keep an eye on you while I track down Ellis and his gang." "You're going after them." Katherine felt a surge of fear that surprised her with its intensity. "It's my job," Luke said simply. "And now it's personal." The way he said it personal made Katherine's heart beat faster. During their days together, something had shifted between them. What had begun as duty, a lawman protecting a witness, had become something neither of them had expected. "I don't want you risking your life because of me," Katherine said softly. Luke's eyes met hers across the small table. "Ellis and his gang have been terrorizing this territory for too long. You're not the first innocent they've harmed, but I aim to make sure you're the last." Katherine reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had deliberately touched him, apart from when he was tending her wound, and the contact sent a jolt through her. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said. Luke's hand turned beneath hers, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. "I promise." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, the firelight playing across their faces. There was so much Katherine wanted to say, but the words stuck in her throat. She was acutely aware of how little time they might have left together. The next morning, Luke announced that they would leave for Laramie the following day if the weather held. "It's a day's ride," he explained as they ate breakfast. "We'll leave at first light. I've got spare furs and blankets to keep you warm." Katherine nodded, trying to ignore the hollowness that had settled in her chest at the thought of their journey ending. In the week they'd spent together, she'd come to admire Luke's quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, and his principled view of the world. The thought that she might never see him again after he delivered her safely to Laramie was more painful than she cared to admit. That day, Katherine insisted on helping with the chores. She fed and brushed Luke's horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding named Rusty, while Luke checked his supplies and prepared for their journey. The domesticity of their shared tasks only heightened Katherine's awareness of what she would soon be leaving behind. As evening approached, Luke surprised her by producing a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet. "Thought we might have a proper toast," he said, looking almost shy. "To your recovery and new beginning in Laramie," Katherine smiled. "I'd like that." They sat before the fire, whiskey warming their insides as the flames warmed the room. Outside, the world was silent, blanketed in snow that sparkled under the moonlight. "I want to thank you," Katherine said after her second small sip of whiskey. "Not just for saving my life, but for your kindness these past days." Luke looked down at his glass. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Katherine said with certainty. "Not anyone." "You're a good man, Lucas Porter." He looked up then, and the intensity in his blue eyes took her breath away. "Katherine, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "These past days having you here." "I know," she said softly. "I've felt it too." The confession hung in the air between them, neither quite brave enough to put into clearer terms what had developed during their time together. Finally, Luke set his glass aside and rose from his chair. "It's getting late. We should both get some rest before tomorrow's journey." Katherine nodded, disappointed yet understanding. There were complications. Neither of them had spoken aloud. Her new position in Laramie, his dangerous work as a deputy marshal, the threat still hanging over her head from Ellis and his gang. As she prepared for bed, Katherine wondered if she was being foolish. She barely knew this man, despite the intensity of their shared experience. Yet something about Lucas Porter called to her in a way no man ever had before. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They prepared for the journey in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Luke packed provisions and checked his weapons while Katherine carefully folded the borrowed clothing he had insisted she keep. As they were about to leave, Katherine paused in the doorway of the cabin, looking back at the simple space that had become a sanctuary for her. "Ready?" Luke asked, standing beside Rusty, who was saddled and waiting. Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. Luke helped her mount the horse, then swung up behind her. The closeness of his body against hers sent a flutter through her stomach, but she forced herself to focus on the journey ahead. They rode in silence through the snow-covered landscape. The world around them was transformed into a glittering wilderness, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Katherine leaned back slightly against Luke's solid chest, drawing comfort from his warmth and presence. About midday, they stopped in a sheltered clearing to rest the horse and eat a quick meal of jerky and hardtack. As they sat on a fallen log, Luke suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "What is it?" Katherine whispered, fear tightening her throat. "Not sure," Luke murmured. "Something doesn't feel right." He stood slowly, scanning the tree line with narrowed eyes. Katherine followed his gaze but saw nothing amiss in the peaceful winter scene. The shot came without warning, kicking up snow near their feet. Luke reacted instantly, pushing Katherine behind the fallen log and drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. "Stay down," he commanded as another shot rang out, splintering bark just above their heads. Katherine's heart hammered in her chest as she pressed herself against the frozen ground. The peaceful silence of moments ago had been shattered, replaced by the terrifying reality of ambush. Luke fired back, his shots deliberate and measured. From their position, Katherine couldn't see their attackers, but she could hear movement in the trees to their left. "Ellis," she whispered. "Likely," Luke replied grimly. "They must have been tracking us." "How, my guess? They found the cabin while we were holed up during the storm and have been waiting for us to make a move." He checked his ammunition. "I count at least 2 of them, maybe 3. Fear threatened to overwhelm Katherine, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do we do? When I give the word, I want you to run for those rocks," Luke instructed, nodding toward a cluster of boulders about 20 yards to their right. "I'll cover you, then follow." Katherine nodded, gathering her courage. At Luke's signal, she sprinted across the open space, expecting at any moment to feel the impact of a bullet. Behind her, Luke fired rapidly, providing the promised cover. She reached the rocks and pressed herself against their cold surface, gasping for breath. Moments later, Luke joined her, reloading his revolver with practiced efficiency. "You all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Yes," she managed. "What now?" "Now we need to get to the horse," Luke said. "He bolted when the shooting started, but he won't have gone far." A voice called out from the trees, harsh and mocking. "Deputy Porter, fancy meeting you out here." Luke's jaw tightened. "Ellis," he muttered. "I know you've got the woman with you," the voice continued. "The one who saw my face. Hand her over and maybe I'll let you walk away." "You know that's not happening, Ellis," Luke called back. "Why don't you come out and face me like a man instead of hiding in the trees?" Ellis laughed, the sound chilling. "Always the hero, Porter. That's what got your partner killed, wasn't it?" Katherine saw Luke flinch as if struck. There was a history here she didn't understand, but she could see the pain it caused him. "Rusty's about 50 yards that way," Luke whispered, pointing to a stand of pine trees. "When I start shooting, I want you to make a run for him. Get on and ride hard for Laramie. Don't stop for anything." "I'm not leaving you," Katherine protested. "You have to," Luke insisted. "I can handle Ellis and his men, but not if I'm worried about keeping you safe." "Luke, please, Katherine." His eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. "I can't lose you too." Before she could respond, Luke leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a swift, fierce kiss. Then he was moving, stepping out from behind the rocks and firing toward their attackers. "Go," he shouted. Katherine ran, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind her, gunfire erupted as Luke engaged the outlaws. She spotted Rusty standing nervously among the pines and made straight for him, whispering soothing words as she approached. The horse allowed her to grab his reins, and she pulled herself into the saddle, wincing as pain lanced through her healing wound. She turned Rusty toward the direction of Laramie, then hesitated, looking back at where Luke was pinned down by gunfire. She couldn't leave him. The realization came with perfect clarity. Whatever had grown between them in that cabin was too precious to abandon. Katherine spotted Luke's rifle in its scabbard on Rusty's saddle. She'd grown up hunting with her father in the forests outside Boston and knew how to handle a firearm. Carefully, she drew the rifle and checked that it was loaded. Taking a deep breath, she urged Rusty forward, circling around to approach the outlaws from behind. Through the trees, she could see 3 men focused on Luke's position, unaware of her approach. Katherine dismounted quietly, tied Rusty to a tree, and moved forward on foot. Her heart was racing, but her hands were steady as she raised the rifle to her shoulder. She fired once, aiming above the men's heads. The shot cracked through the winter air, startling the outlaws. In their moment of confusion, Luke emerged from cover, gun drawn. "Drop your weapons," he commanded. 2 of the men obeyed, but the third, a man with a crescent-shaped scar on his cheek, turned and fired wildly in Katherine's direction. She ducked behind a tree as Luke returned fire, the shot finding its mark. Ellis crumpled to the ground with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. Within moments, Luke had disarmed and restrained all 3 men. He looked up to see Katherine approaching, rifle in hand, and his expression shifted from concern to admiration. "I thought I told you to ride for Laramie," he said, though there was no anger in his voice. "I decided not to take orders from you, Deputy Porter," Katherine replied, lowering the rifle. "It seems to have worked out for the best." Luke's face broke into a reluctant smile. "Remind me never to underestimate you, Miss James." With the outlaws secured, they continued their journey to Laramie, the prisoners walking ahead while Luke and Katherine followed on horseback. The town appeared on the horizon as the sun began to set, its buildings glowing golden in the fading light. "What happens now?" Katherine asked as they approached the outskirts of Laramie. "Now I turn these men over to the sheriff," Luke replied. "Ellis will stand trial for the stagecoach robbery and attempted murder, among other charges." And after that, Luke was silent for a moment. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "On whether the new schoolteacher might have room in her life for a deputy marshal who's fallen in love with her." Katherine's heart soared at his words. "I think she might," she said softly. "In fact, I'm certain of it." Their arrival in Laramie caused quite a stir. The sheriff, a gruff man named Hank Jennings, was astounded to see Luke returning with Ellis and his gang in custody. The town council was equally surprised and delighted to meet their new schoolteacher, though they expressed concern about her ordeal. In the days that followed, Katherine settled into her role in Laramie. The schoolhouse was small but welcoming, and the children eager to learn. She found herself quickly embraced by the community, particularly after the story of her bravery during the capture of the Ellis gang spread throughout the town. Luke was often away, his duties as deputy marshal taking him across the territory, but he always returned to Laramie to her. Their courtship progressed with a certainty that surprised them both, as if the intense days they had spent isolated in the cabin had formed a foundation stronger than years of conventional acquaintance could have built. 3 months after her arrival in Laramie, Katherine sat grading papers in her small rented room when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Luke standing there, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "May I come in?" he asked. Katherine stepped aside, curious about his demeanor. "Is everything all right?" Luke paced the small room for a moment before turning to face her. "I've been offered a promotion," he said. "Marshal for the eastern half of the territory." "Luke, that's wonderful," Katherine exclaimed. "You deserve it. It would mean moving to Cheyenne," he continued, "setting up an office there." Katherine felt her heart sink. Cheyenne was a considerable distance from Laramie. "I see," she said quietly. "When would you leave?" "That depends," Luke said, echoing his words from the day they'd arrived in Laramie. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Katherine James, these past months have been the happiest of my life. What began in that cabin during the storm has only grown stronger with each passing day." Katherine's breath caught as Luke dropped to one knee before her. "I don't want to go to Cheyenne or anywhere without you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Joy bubbled up inside Katherine, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Lucas Porter." Luke stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with promise and passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead against hers. "I was found in the cold," she murmured, remembering his words on the day they met. "And you brought me back to light. And you brought light back into my life," Luke replied. "After years of darkness, you showed me there was still goodness in this world worth fighting for." Their wedding took place that spring with the whole town of Laramie in attendance. The schoolhouse where Katherine had taught was transformed with wildflowers and ribbons, a celebration of new beginnings and second chances. As Katherine walked toward Luke, resplendent in her cream-colored gown, she reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. The danger and fear that had marked her arrival in Wyoming territory had given way to something beautiful and unexpected, a love as vast and enduring as the western landscape itself. They settled in Cheyenne, where Luke's reputation as the marshal who captured the notorious Ellis gang preceded him. Katherine found a position at the local school, her passion for education undiminished by the change in location. Their home, a modest but comfortable house on the outskirts of town, became known for its hospitality and warmth. Luke's work still took him away at times, pursuing justice across the territory, but he always returned to Katherine with the same devotion that had marked their days in the cabin. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed a daughter, Emma, followed by a son, James, 18 months later. Their family thrived in the growing town, putting down roots that would sustain generations to come. On cold winter nights, when snow blanketed the Wyoming landscape, Luke would often tell their children the story of how he found their mother half buried in a snowdrift during the worst storm in years. "She was barely breathing," he would say, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "But something told me not to give up on her." "What was it, Papa?" Emma would ask, her eyes wide with wonder at the familiar tale. Luke would smile, his gaze meeting Katherine's across the room. "I think it was fate, little one. Some people are just meant to find each other, no matter what stands in their way." And Katherine, watching the man she loved surrounded by the family they had created together, knew that he was right. From the darkness and cold of that winter day had come a light that would warm them for all their days, a love born in adversity and tempered by the wild beauty of the West. As the years passed, Luke and Katherine Porter became fixtures in Cheyenne society. Luke's fair-minded approach to law enforcement earned him respect throughout the territory, while Katherine's dedication to education influenced a generation of young minds. They watched as Wyoming changed around them, as the railroad brought new settlers, as towns grew into cities, as the territory moved toward statehood. Through it all, their love remained constant, a beacon in the sometimes harsh realities of frontier life. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Luke took Katherine back to the mountains where they had first met. The old cabin still stood, though weathered by the passing years. They spent a week there, away from their grown children and the responsibilities of their positions, reconnecting with the place where their story had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Luke asked as they sat before the fire, gray now touching both their heads. "Coming west." All the danger and hardship, Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, as comfortable in his presence now as she had been on that first journey to Laramie. "Not for a moment," she said. "Everything that happened led me to you. How could I regret that?" Luke pressed a kiss to her temple, his love for her as strong as it had been on the day he'd found her in the snow. "You know, when I said I'd bring you back to light, I never imagined how much light you'd bring into my life." Katherine smiled, thinking of their children, their grandchildren, and all the years they had shared. "We brought each other back," she said softly. "And that light has never dimmed." Outside, snow began to fall, a gentle reminder of the storm that had once brought them together. But inside the cabin, all was warmth and light, a testament to the enduring power of a love that had begun with a rescue in the cold and blossomed into a lifetime of joy.